this is the rifle that I got in, and you can see I already started messing with it a bit up here, trying to reshape the nose a little bit. But this came in from a friend, and it wasn't the best builder. Did spend a lot of time sanding. As you can see, there's a lot of rough spaces in here, and used a little filler here and there. But what I'm going to try and do is salvage this gun a little bit by refinishing this. It's also got a very squared area right here that can be taken care of. I think I'll probably end up having to drop the thimble down a little bit. You can see that it's sticking up here, so I'll try and bring it down a little bit, get rid of this lump here in this area. But let me flip this over and see what I've already started doing. Alright, so like I said earlier, started redoing the nose a little bit. It had a couple of bad bumps in the end of it here, so I just cut it back a little bit and took it down some, rounded it off a little bit. He just had it cut off square, and I'm going to work this down a little bit more. Like I said, I'm going to try and get rid of that squared area. Started scraping and sanding through here, trying to get rid of some of the biggest divots, and I can feel there's a high spot here I'll take out. Started sanding around the lock area, trying to sharpen up the edges a little bit. And as we go down the stock here, you can see I've started working on this, and yeah, you can kind of get an idea of how rough the surface was on this gun. And as we go back, you can see more of that through here. So I just want to sort of scrape and sand a lot of this away, get it a little bit smoother, and then I'll put a quick stain and finish on it. It's got a big blotch of stain on here. I also started redoing the trigger guard and trigger area. The trigger plate was sticking up a little bit, so I dropped that down. The front of the trigger guard is okay. The rear, though, he did not inlet the rear of the trigger guard into the wood, so I'll go ahead and do that as would be proper. And on the trigger guard itself, you can see that he kind of rounded everything off, which is okay, but you know, it could be a little cleaner. Putting a screw in the front here is a no-no. I've never really seen that done, except possibly on Tennessee mountain guns. So unfortunately, I don't have another guard like this on hand. You should have left the tab on there, inlet it in, and of course pinned it. The back end, screw again, but that's okay. In the rear, you do see that at least up until about around 1790 or so into the 1820s, you start seeing it a lot more. They got rid of the pin, got rid of the screw by the 1820s and started going with a tab and a pin. But I'll just, you know, clean this up a little bit too. There's some rough file work in there, and didn't bother to file the inside much at all. So we'll just clean it up. And the trigger, or the side plate here, he kind of got overzealous with the draft, and I've talked about that before. You want to bevel the edges so that they sort of force themselves into a tight fit. Well, he did extremely steep bevel on these. This is the inside. So not much I can do about that, and what keeps happening now is that whenever you take the lock bolts out, of course this just drops on the ground too, as there's no friction to hold it in place. So not much I can do about that. So let me also point out that the touch hole here is going to have a liner in it. He actually drilled this out 3/32. And what that means is when he goes to load the rifle, your powder's going to fall out, especially if you're using 3F. This is a 50 caliber gun, so 3F is okay. 2F would be fine, but you're going to start losing powder out of here, or if you keep the pan closed, it's going to be self-priming. So I don't want that big a hole. It should be no bigger than a 1/16 of an inch. So I'll put a touch hole liner in there and fix that. And the lock is, this gun really has never been shot since he built it. It's got a few gaps around it. You can see some in the back here. And it's a little, the plate drops in a lot here in the front, so I'll take down some wood to get rid of some of that. But all in all, it fits pretty good. I think once I stain and finish, it'll look even better. But that's what I'm going to try and do, is just kind of salvage this gun as it is and see if I can't make it look a little bit nicer and sell it to somebody for him and get as much as I can out of it. So hang on for future developments. The best way to take out a lot of this stuff is start off with a scraper. Got a piece of steel here that I've turned into a good scraper. And you just work it. I use a scraper a lot. It's cheaper than sandpaper. It was very common in the 18th and 19th century. I've even owned a rifle for a while that was made in the Valley of Virginia that walnut stock, you could see little scrape marks all over it. It had never been sanded when it was built. And that's how smooth the finish you can actually get. The use of sandpaper today is kind of overdone. It was expensive in the 18th century, so scrapers were used quite a bit to do the same effect. And contrary to what you'll hear a lot of people talk about, scraping, I've never read of any account of them using a piece of broken glass or anything like that, because a piece of glass just doesn't break as easily as you need it to be. A good piece of steel like this wasn't terribly expensive and it'll last for years. You can resharpen these things, and they're made by actually rubbing a hardened steel over top of them, and it burrs the edge slightly, and that'll give you a nice sharp edge again. This one's getting a little dull, but it still works pretty good. And you can buy scrapers in various shapes, dimensions. This is one I use, and this inside curve here is great for doing ramrod channels, and then the curved areas are good for getting in little areas that are radiused. But a flat one is the most common one you'll use. But you can see how on this stock there's still lots of areas here that are pretty bad. So just keep scraping until they go away, and if you want to, then you can lightly sand it with some 320 grit to smooth it all out, and that's really all you need to do. This will take a little while. I'll come back and let you see what this looks like after I've got all this scraped and sanded, and then I'll continue on with the rest of it. Something I wanted to add real quick here, when you're scraping, especially on some curly maple like this, if you're scraping and your blade is in line with the grain and at the curl, it tends to want to follow that, because the curl is hard in soft areas where the grain undulates. So the best thing to do on that, to get a nice smooth surface, is to get your blade at an angle to the curl and scrape, and that way it'd be less likely to follow that curl pattern. Alright, we got this long rifle I showed you earlier with all the really bad marks in the wood. And I've got a preliminary stain on here to help show me where I needed to sand some more or scrape. And the buttstock's looking pretty good. There's a few dents I couldn't quite get out completely, and wasn't a lot I can do with the filler you put in here unless I changed out the butt plate, which I didn't want to go into. But it's a whole lot smoother now. The fore end is still sanded out. Got to finish up a few little spots. But it looks a whole lot better than it did before, and when I'm finished out it'll at least look 200% better. But the whole trick is just take your time with it. I might scrape a little bit more right through here, try and get some of that dark spots out of that. And scraping is pretty easy really when you start doing it. The whole trick is just go with the grain. You can see how much material is coming off of that already just for the few scraping I did. It's actually faster than sanding, so it's a good way to get through some of the rough stuff first and then come back and finish sand it later. You can see some right in here. You just scrape it out. Like I said earlier, I do like scraping because it's quick, easy to do. You're not wasting a lot of expensive sandpaper. When I get ready to sand this, I'll just go over it lightly with some 320 and smooth it all up a little bit. So that looks better already. I'll do a little bit more in here. A few more spots I see need to be done. But again, scrape your stock. You'd be surprised how effective it really is.
Intermission time. Time that stretch you've been wanting. And best of all, time to take your pick from that scrumptious array of tasty treats waiting for you at the snack bar. You'll be notified in plenty of time when the next show is about to begin.
Alright, so here's this rifle I showed you earlier that the finish was really rough and poor. So I've scraped it all down, gave it a quick stain and a quick finish just to make it look a little better. I also went ahead and inlet the trigger guard rear here so it'd be down into the wood. Kind of cleaned up everything that I could. Cleaned up around here that was very square, and refiled and polished the thimbles a little bit. Took a lot of wood off the fore end and rounded the nose off. The nose had a slight ding in it, so I cut that back, and I cut the barrel back a 1/4 of an inch too to make it, you know, line up a little nicer. So it's got a nice clean crown on it now, and the bore is actually very good. It's a Green Mountain barrel. It's never been fired, so it's very clean inside. Let me flip it over and we'll show you the other side. Alright, so here's the left side. Got it cleaned up pretty nicely. Like I said earlier, there was a little bit of filler on each side of the butt plate, and that's why I went with a very dark stain, but you can still see some of the curl in the wood. So it actually looks pretty decent. Butt plate is fairly tight. trigger guard again is nice and tight, good trigger to it, with no slop. Side plate, some gaps around the edges, but there's not much I can do about that unless I make a larger side plate to sort of overfill the area, but I think it's fine like it is for what it is. Putting your bolts in. Fore end's been cleaned up again on this side, so it's looking pretty good. I think it'll make somebody a real nice hunting gun you can carry through the woods and not worry about scratching or denting it up. And basically it'll be priced out basically for cost of parts, so you'll get a pretty good deal. This did have a slight problem where right here behind the cock you'll see a little light mark there. That's actually glue. This piece had a check in it in the wood, and I had to sort of open that up and re-glue this whole section back on, and you can see that under here. You can see a slight separation right there and a line going back. It's securely epoxied. I don't think it'll cause any real problems, but that's just part of the build here. The guy didn't do the best job. You can see up front here there's a little indentation there where he'd cut out too much wood, and I didn't try and fool with it too much because I didn't want it to get too thin in that area, so I kind of left it. Let me flip it over and we'll take a look at the other side real quick. Here's the top of the gun. I had one dent here pretty bad. I couldn't get out of it, so I just left it. Tang had a couple of problems and still does. There's a slight gap along this edge here. Not bad, and there's slight gaps here. It's actually tight to the wood at the bottom of the barrel, but there's a slight gap at the top, and I couldn't move the barrel back any further than what I did. If it really bothers somebody, you can get in there with some epoxy, two-part epoxy blended with a little bit of paint, and you can use it as a filler to fill in all this if you wanted to. But barrel's been browned, front and rear sights installed and centered.